here's why nuclear energy is just not a very good solution to climate change.
There's a lot to unpack here, so let's see what we can do. So, in order to support his conclusion that nuclear power is not a solution to climate change, he has three main premises.
The two big problems nuclear is facing in this area is cost and time.
And then there's an implied premise that wind and solar are good enough. So let's first start with the time and the cost, because those are really linked with each other. He does have a point that a lot of those examples that he gave has taken way too long. In the past, we've had places like France, Ontario, Sweden, they've been able to build nuclear power very rapidly. In only about 10 to 15 years, France was able to build out so much nuclear that their grid is one of the cleanest grids in all of Europe. And in modern days, you have places like China and South Korea. They've been able to build out nuclear power so fast, it's only taken them 3 to 4 years. And the goal here is to just get started building reactors. If you start them now, even if it did take 15 years, in 15 years you could have an entire grid full of nuclear. Trying to say that it's slow is short-sighted, and it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you keep thinking that nuclear power is too slow and you don't build it, well, nuclear that you don't build is obviously going to be too slow. But if you start building it and getting that learning curve, you can build it very rapidly. If you have these really long build times, it's going to add to the cost. It's the reason why nuclear power is thought to be really expensive. Now, the examples that he gave are those first-of-a-kind builds. We haven't had a construction industry in the United States for 30 to 40 years. So all of those people that are working on building those reactors in Georgia have very little experience on how to build reactors. And for that reason, those reactors are going to take a long time and they're going to be expensive. But if we kept that momentum up, we could really speed up those build times and reduce those costs. I find it very interesting how people will complain about the costs about nuclear now. Those same people, back when wind and solar were the most expensive sources of energy out there, didn't complain about how expensive those were. But now that they're really cheap, they're pointing at nuclear power being too expensive. There is nothing that prevents us from doing the same thing with nuclear power as what we did with wind and solar. All we need is public and government support. So here's the reason why wind and solar, while part of it, are an incomplete solution to climate change. Wind and solar have dramatically decreased in costs, but they're not good enough. So wind and solar are variable sources of energy. They aren't a direct replacement for fossil fuel capacity. And like I mentioned in my video before, you can't take those levelized costs that you've heard about from wind and solar and variable sources of energy and compare them directly to dispatchable and baseload sources of energy like nuclear and fossil fuels. Now, wind and solar are considered fuel-saving technologies. They allow you to use less natural gas or less coal, but as soon as that wind and solar drop down, your coal or your natural gas need to ramp up to almost the same capacity as if you didn't have wind and solar on the grid at all. You might be thinking to yourself, can't we just build out batteries to take that wind and solar when there's a lot of it and distribute it throughout the day? Well, not very much. Batteries are good for the frequency regulation on your grid, and they help with the ramp rates of your fossil fuels. So when that wind and that solar decide to drop down dramatically, and when natural gas or coal are trying to ramp up to meet demand, batteries are able to make it to where that ramp is not as dramatic to allow that natural gas and other fossil fuels to be able to ramp up. But they aren't able to smooth out that grid all the way. And not only do you need to smooth it out for an entire day, your solar and your wind are variable from day to week throughout the year, and even from year to year it changes dramatically. And besides maybe pumped hydro, to this day there is no battery source that is able to take that electricity and even smooth it out for 1 day. It just doesn't exist. I get a lot of people that give me comments that, you know what, maybe in the future it will exist. But honestly, that's a big gamble. There is no plan to be able to have any source of battery storage that is able to take the grid. This is why no country on Earth has been able to utilize only wind and solar to completely decarbonize their grids. The ones that have done it have used hydro, which is limited by its location, and nuclear power. So wind and solar cannot be the full solution to climate change, and nuclear power must be a part of it.